Writing Beyond Writing: Voyages Among Endangered Alphabets.
So, Tim Brookes, you have a new book that you're working on. What's it? Let's start with the title. What's it called?
Yes, it's called Writing Beyond Writing. And, like all writers, I like titles that have multiple meanings. It's a weakness.
I was going to ask you, what does it mean? How do we write beyond writing?
Yeah, a paradox. We writers love paradoxes as well. Yeah. So the word beyond is really important because what the book is really about is what I've been doing over the last 12 or 13 years with the Endangered Alphabets Project. And that has involved literally going out beyond. I actually say, when you go out among the endangered alphabets, because the majority of indigenous and minority writing systems are not in the heartland of the first world. They are out in South Asia and Indonesia and
Right.
sort of further afield. So this has really involved a lot of global travel, although unfortunately only, by the internet. The second thing is that in doing this travel and this research and coming across all of these remarkable writing systems, it began to become clear to me that many of the assumptions that we, without thinking, sort of take for granted because of our use of the Latin alphabet are really not true. They don't hold true elsewhere. And in fact, they really start shaking up your view of everything you've assumed. I mean, I've been a writer all my adult life, and I'd never asked myself many of these questions. And then the third thing would be that once you get out and see how other cultures view writing, use writing, think of the genesis of writing, etc., you realize that our very notions of what writing is and what it's for are not absolute. Our definitions of writing, in fact, are very suspect. They're actually just based on our own writing.
Right.
And once you get out there, you realize, whoa, there is far more to the act of writing and the exchange of writing than I ever believed was true.
I can absolutely see that. It makes a lot of sense because oftentimes when I'm doing workshops on cross-cultural communication, I'll tell people what is normal is just what you're used to. It's what you've grown up with. And then, you just sort of think that that's the way the world is. What are some of the key things that you discovered as you were doing this work that made you, were there a couple of things that sort of crystallized it that made you go, oh, wow, I really need to write a book about this. This as a concept is worthy of expansion.
Yes. So one of the things that I discovered straight away was I thought, I'm seeing so many interesting things about writing that view writing from so many different points of view. I ought to go and have a look at the definition of writing. And so I looked up a number of definitions that were minted in our Western first world. And I thought that isn't necessarily true at all, or it's true only in a very limited way. Mm-hmm. And a great example is that among linguists, it's common to say that the definition of writing is that these are visible symbols that represent the sounds of speech. That's it. Mm-hmm. Nothing else. They're simply there to represent the sounds of speech. Mm-hmm. And what is really clear once you get into a variety of other cultures is that the visual impact of those symbols is extraordinarily important and profound and very deep in their cultural self-understanding and their identity. So much so that there are a number of cultures I've come across where individual letters or pieces of their writing will show up on flags or on the state seal or on stamps, these really iconic places that are about, cultural identity, even though people can no longer read them. So the symbol has transcended the sounds of speech. It's become something that is part of their iconic visual landscape. It connects them with their history, their sense of value in the world, their sense that they have a right to belong.
And, it's interesting. I would think that we would catch that a little bit more, those of us who, have habitually used the Latin alphabet or the Greek alphabet, Cyrillic, whatever. Because even for users of those alphabets, think about the premium that graphic designers can command, knowing how to use different fonts and how to, make a piece of script look visually appealing. So there is that sense, I think, that seems to transcend cultures of the ability of writing to be a sort of art form. But you're right. For some reason, we divorce it from that and just think of it in this sort of mechanistic way, like you're saying.
It's so interesting you should say that, because the way the whole book starts out is in 1968, when I'm a kid in high school and I have a falling out with a bunch of friends, and I decide to move to the other side of the classroom. So I'm no longer sitting with them. I mean, how petulant and childish can you be, right? And I'm the desk that I moved to was behind the desk where a kid called Alan Webster sat. And he was a tough little nugget and a born outsider. And he spent all of his time just drawing on his notepad or his textbook covers, which was completely forbidden in this very strict school. But what he was drawing, because this was 1968, was the names of bands, but he was doing them in all of these sort of graphic, typographic, art writing crossover forms that were just becoming really popular and were shaking up that classic distinction between art and writing, which, as you know, because of your Greek connection, if you go back to Greek, graphos means both of them. So that division, which took place centuries ago and then became sort of ossified, was now coming back together again. And I thought, this is so interesting when you start looking at minority writing systems. You start going, oh, this is a graphic experience in a way that the notion that writing is like this and not like something else misses completely.
I totally see what you're saying there. That also puts me in mind, actually, of the way, and, you can have ideas about the aesthetic value or lack of aesthetic value of it and what it does to urban landscapes, but graffiti artists will often make the same claim, and they do have a legitimate point when you look at it that way. What they're doing is reuniting that idea of script and art back together.
Yeah, and if you look at say, the Mongolian script, then because it is a script, in other words, it's based on the movement of the human hand and on the brush, on the paper or the silk or whatever the medium is, you can see the drama of the act of writing. And one of the great things about graffiti is that it's an incredibly dramatic form.
Yes.
It doesn't stay within the Times New Roman confines that are part of our definition of writing. I mean, it's astonishing to me. I discovered in the late 1990s that most graduate schools required theses to be submitted in 12-point Times New Roman. That was it. So that it's as if all of education up until that age was leading you to the point where you've reached this kind of intellectual austerity, that rigor, where you're able to use Times New Roman and you don't want anything else, and graffiti, and then many of these scripts, which are hand-driven scripts rather than printing-based scripts, you see where the brush hits the page and how it moves, and you realize that the act of writing is a human act. It's entirely governed by the shoulder joint, the elbow joint, the wrist, the fingers. It becomes an extension of who we are physically, who we are mentally, how our energetic state is at that particular time of day, how much we're focusing on what we're doing. So the book really looks at writing from a number of perspectives, but many of them are entirely different from the ways that I've been thinking about writing when I was a writer.
So yeah, you're looking at it from the cultural perspective, the psychological perspective, the biomechanical perspective. You're taking all these different facets of it, all of which go into the act of writing, and seeing how does it look from each of those angles.
Yes, and in a way, the COVID pandemic really played into this. So
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, how did this?
Yes, so I had been noticing these things and thinking about them as I was working on the Endangered Alphabets Project. And then when COVID hit, and of course everybody is isolated, I could no longer go out to libraries and colleges and universities and museums with my carvings and do the kinds of talk that I was used to doing. And so I did a series, which is actually available on the endangeredalphabets.com YouTube channel. So if you just go to endangeredalphabets.com, you click on that little YouTube icon and you can find it there. And I decided to call it the Open House series, because what I did was I literally used my laptop camera and my phone camera, and I walked around the house filming some of these carvings and talking about them. But what that did, it made me think in these more kind of thematic versions. So I did a talk about writing as a spiritual act. And then, as you say, writing as a biomechanical act, the relationship between writing and printing. I asked this question, is printing writing? That one actually started when I was sitting at the ferry dock in my car waiting for the ferry. This was a year or so after the COVID hit. And I realized that I was surrounded by writing, all these various signs and whatnot. But all of it was printed. There wasn't anything to be seen that had actually been handwritten. And I thought that's so interesting, because it suggests that handwriting is unprofessional or inadequate or too personal. Or, we've come to think of writing as something which should aspire to a level of impersonality, which is such a strange and possibly sick thing, that we have this ability to do something which is essentially a gift. I've come to regard writing as a gift from one person to another, or one person to others, because in the very shaping of your letters, you're revealing who and what you are. It's a kind of autobiography. And in offering it to somebody else, you're placing yourself in that kind of public and somewhat vulnerable position. And you're also offering something of yourself Because when you write, you are drawing on aspects of yourself, or you certainly can be, that in ordinary sort of interpersonal exchange you might not do. So if I were to be sitting and talking to you and say, so, what is your understanding of the spiritual universe, right? You probably haven't been asked that face to face, and you would have to gather your thoughts, right? And writing gives you the opportunity to do that, to find the best of what you have to offer. And that then becomes a gift.
That makes, no, I see what you're saying, because it does. It forces you to slow down, organize your thoughts, and like you say, sort of distill them and offer the best of them to the person. I find it really fascinating in thinking about this, how we've managed to depersonalize print and depersonalize the printed word. And I say that thinking this, even in, and I go back to this, even in Western cultures where we're using these pretty heavily alphabetical, these Phoenician-based scripts, usually Latin, Greek, Cyrillic, whatever, and modifications thereof, and where we have to a large degree divorced the personal element from the script, and like you say, use that impersonality as a sign of academic rigor, professionalism, whatever. And yet somewhere inside of us, we know the impact, the personal impact that script can have. I'm thinking of just a very personal example. My mom passed away 2 years ago. I still have notes that she wrote me that are in her script, which I immediately recognize her handwriting. Yep. If it was printed, I also have text that she sent me, but you see what I'm saying? It's not the same as seeing the letters that she wrote with her hand that, since I had seen them literally ever since I understood what writing was, I can recognize, like I would recognize her voice. The impact is different. The way it moves me is different. What it means to me is different. And it's interesting to me that we've sort of compartmentalized it in that odd way, but we absolutely have. You're right.
So I'm going to be running a Kickstarter campaign to fund the production of the book, and hopefully, if we raise enough money, audiobook version as well. And one of the Kickstarter rewards is going to be a fountain pen, or in fact, people are going to have the choice of either a fountain pen or a calligraphy pen. And a really, really nice fountain pen made of wood, burl wood, and just lovely. And it didn't even occur to me when I first started designing the Kickstarter to introduce something like this as a reward. And I was just thinking very much along the lines that you were talking about. And I thought, if this book and this Kickstarter is going to be all about rediscovering writing and rediscovering writing as a means of creating relationships, as opposed to writing as a means of conveying information or data, which is the way the Western definitions, describe it, then we ought to have something that encourages people to do that. And that isn't to say I'm saying, if you're not writing with a fountain pen, you're not writing. What I am saying is, there are certain aspects of writing that you're going to discover or rediscover,
right,
that you may have forgotten if you use a fountain pen. And it's I really love the thought that as an outcome of all of this, either somebody starts kind of going, I really want to sort of focus on my writing as I'm doing it, as a form of meditation, as a discipline, etc. Or I really want to make sure that I do send my relatives little handwritten notes. And that's another part of the Kickstarter. At a certain level, people get little handwritten notes of thanks from me. And that is going to force me to slow down and write something that is meaningful, as opposed to dash off a letter, so to speak.
Right. Absolutely. And I really like that idea that people can be offered a tool to do exactly what you're talking about here and what you'll be talking about in the book. I mean, that's really wonderful. What is there a certain set of scripts that you're going to be examining in the book, or is it from a certain region in the world, or is it just sort of a survey of the act and art of writing from those various facets we described, all using examples from all over the world?
Right.
How do you envision it coming together?
Yes. So after I did the open house Zoom series, I did two other Zoom series, also available at endangeredalphabets.com. Click on the YouTube channel, etc. And I realized that I had a choice. One was, do I, let's say I'm going to do a series of 8 Zoom talks. Do I focus each one on a particular script and say, so what is it that we can discover or learn from looking at the script and its culture? Or do I do it the other way around and say, here's an idea that I found in all of my work. How does that idea grow out of certain scripts, and which are they? And I actually did one. I did one series each way, and another reason why I'm doing this as a Kickstarter is that I'm absolutely sure that a publisher, a conventional publisher, would want to say, oh, no, we need to focus on a script, right? This one is about the Balinese script. And I thought, no, to me, this is all about these extraordinary ideas and ways of thinking about writing. So really, each chapter is an essay on a way of thinking about writing, but then it gets illustrated by looking at a number of writing cultures and like, what did I learn? What can we see there? And then how can we turn around and look back at ourselves? So I say that, every voyage of discovery is a voyage of self-discovery. And if you go out looking for alphabets, then you're going to come back looking at your own and say, whoa, absolutely, I never thought of it that way.
Which ties into that larger idea of writing being a self-reflective process and a meditative process.
Yeah, very much so.
Do you have plans to, is it just going to be a physical book? I know you mentioned an audio book. Are there plans for an ebook? How do you imagine this rolling out? What forms do you want to offer it in?
So we're definitely doing it as a print book in both softcover and hardback. Because again, a hardback has that kind of permanence, which is another aspect of writing, which we've sort of forgotten because you can type so fast, with your thumbs. Then it seems to be all about speed. But I was just looking at some Mayan statues or sculptures yesterday and thinking, for them, the act of writing was so important. They engraved it in stone, right? That's the amount of work put into this. Absolutely. Shows the amount of meaning and importance that they wanted to capture and make permanent. So I love the idea of a hardback, which is going to survive, a little bit better the test of time. And then people have been saying to you, you've got to do an audiobook because you can be the David Attenborough of the written word. And I do a David Attenborough voice, I have to say, but I don't think I'm going to do the audiobook in that voice. But the audiobook really gives an opportunity. It gives an opportunity for drama and emphasis. And so when you're writing, and of course, as a writer, I've sort of tried to work with this my entire adult life, is like, how do you reach out from the page and seize the reader? Which absolutely. Actually, we should have a conversation about emojis in just a minute. And the audiobook, there's no writing there in the physical sense, but it's my chance to reach out through the microphone and the speaker and try and seize the reader by the lapels.
I like that idea. I like that idea. And that's okay. So let's get into that thing about emojis, because there's something that I've noticed, and this is maybe in the last 6 months about emojis, but I want to hear what your take is on them.
So wait a second. Don't be so modest. What is it that you've noticed in the last 6 months about emojis?
So, and I'm looking at this admittedly through, the language, or I'm sorry, through the lens of the work that I do as a language educator and as a language learner then on the side. And here's something I've noticed. Emojis are a really good way to help reduce potential ambiguity and by conveying emotion in written text. And here's what I mean by that. Not all cultures treat sarcasm the same, right?
Right.
The US is, American English is full of sarcasm. Greek can be pretty sarcastic. Sarcasm falls flat in Japanese. It just doesn't really work. And you can try to be sarcastic and people will take you exactly at face value and you wind up insulting people. But here's something I've learned in the process of learning other languages. You can throw in an emoji and it conveys how you mean what you said. So even if you're not communicating it completely according to the cultural norms of the language that you're learning to speak, because you haven't been thoroughly acculturated, the emoji gets across, this is what I mean by what I'm saying.
Yep.
How much more so when you're communicating in your native language or a language that you have been fully acculturated into, and you can use it to like you say, grab the person by the lapels and really communicate with words and symbols. Yep. What you mean.
Yep.
But for all people want to kind of denigrate the use of emojis and look at them as a breakdown of communication or the ability to communicate, I think they can really add something. I have seen and I have experienced language learners really be able to use them to make sure that the message they're communicating is being communicated clearly. So I see them as an aid to communication now, directly as an aid to communication now.
Yes. So for me, this goes back to the divergence of graphos, or the bifurcation of graphos. So yes, when you get to a point, and we'll take it from my initial story, say in 1968, where in academic, intellectual Western society, there is an extraordinarily broad gulf between writing in alphabetical terms, which is regarded as being essential for the to convey abstract thought. We have abstract symbols, therefore we can convey abstract thought. This is the highest kind of thought. It represents the highest kind of civilization. So at the other extreme, you have systems that I've discovered, in the last 12, 13 years, which are very graphic, which got completely denigrated because anything graphic was seen as being childish or uncivilized. And so when you go to West Africa, for example, and you see the Adinkra symbol, or you see the CBD symbols, or the Garsamai, they would be poo-pooed as being, well, what do you expect? These are primitive people. So part of the reconvergence has to do with the reintroduction of these graphic elements, first of all, starting with color and font. So I have this great New Yorker cartoon where, a boy of about, 8 is standing in the front of the classroom, and the teacher is looking down at him in some consternation. And he's saying, before I read my book report, I would like to discuss my font choice. And at the time, that's a great insight into the times, because people were getting PCs with font packages. And so all of a sudden you were liberated from, say, a typewriter where you literally just had one font on the, on the keys. And so you had, all of a sudden, as soon as you're using a PC, you have fonts and you have the ability to do color. And of course, kids in particular were like, okay, done and done. Right, here we go with this.
Right.
And adults are sort of like, oh, well, that's just childish, you know. And then the next wave of graphic import was emojis. And again, it was led by children. And in fact, as I was working on one of the essays of this book, some conservative commentator in the US said, emojis are only for children and women. Unbelievable.
There's a lot to unpack in that
statement.
Kidding.
No kidding. Right.
Wow.
And but yes, and so what happens is that the emojis reintroduce that really direct emotional exchange, because we look at the face for all of our cues. You know, it's such an expressive and important part of communication. And so you're in a way, you're reintroducing body language into verbal language. Plus, you know, you can do color and all sorts of other things like that. And there's one of my favorite emojis is this one, which is like both eyes are just straight lines and the mouth is just a straight line. And my daughter and I use it so she'll send me a text where, you know, there's some, company or institution or whatever that has done just something extraordinarily stupid. And she'll just go like that with emoji. And I defy anybody to put that expression and its meaning into words, especially say fewer than say 12 words. We know exactly what it means, but it would take a lot of words to convey that. And as you say, especially in transcultural and translingual communication, that's a huge thing. And of course, many of these West African symbol systems have as part of their great advantage the fact that they can be used in different language cultures throughout the region.
Absolutely. And that is one of the big advantages of a pictographic system, like you say. It becomes less bound, even in the eyes of its original users, to a particular morphological or phonological set, and has a little bit more portability. I mean, that's why the Chinese characters were relatively easy to import to Japan. You know, then characters had to be sort of branched off of that because the different grammar, etc., and phonology and morphology of the Japanese language being nothing like any Chinese variety. But you can see how that keeping it closer to that sort of pictographic state offers, like you say, more portability, and it can be sort of transferred. It has more transcultural cachet,
right,
in that way.
And in fact, that's another weakness of the definition, that writing is just an effort to reproduce the sounds of speech, because speech is only one of the means we have of communicating. So when you and I are talking, and we're doing this a lot, we are using our bodies and our faces a great deal. And so to say, no, you need to strip all of that out, and you've got to go back to like a telephone conversation, right? But even in a telephone conversation, there's various kinds of emphases and rhythms and stuff. But anyway, so when you have somebody who's texting somebody else and they're able to convey the speech component and the body language component in writing and in texting, then all of a sudden you have broadened your ability to convey what you want to convey. And so writing then is now not about conveying the sounds of speech, it's about an attempt visually to convey the totality of meaning.
That's very true. Very true. Yeah, you're trying to basically communicate simultaneously over as many channels as possible. Like you say, to get the fullness of the meaning of what you're saying, and therefore have more complete communication.
Right.
How do you want this? How's this Kickstarter going to roll out? How is this all going to, like, what's your vision for this? You want to, what are you looking at in terms of, because I know you said one of the Kickstarter gifts is going to be, a fountain pen. Like how long do you think it's going to take for the book to come to fruition? What's the sort of rollout that you're looking at here?
Yes, so it'll be a 30-day Kickstarter because that's the ones that I usually run, which is basically 2 days of excitement and 28 days of anxiety. And I'm planning to launch it very soon. My aim is that the book in all of its forms will be ready in time for next Christmas. So the gift-giving season, the aim is for all of the various editions to be ready by, say, 1st of October. And also what's going to happen during the Kickstarter campaign is that I'm going to be doing a couple of Zoom talks about some of the issues that we've been talking about today, but with, a whole bunch of visuals, which will also be in the book. Wow. So the book it's going to be a lot of words, but as we were just saying, a lot of pictures as well, because there's so much that you can only convey visually that way. So I mean, when you see a Batak bark book, so this is a book that's made of bark, and it's concertina in design. You sort of go, wait a second, that looks like an artist's book that would be made, in a short run letterpress printed by, a really cool artist that I know. And it's like, yeah, we have a bunch of stuff to learn. When you see charms that were incised in buffalo horn in what is now Indonesia, then you sort of go, so what is the relationship between the writer and the medium being used? So buffalo horn obviously is useful because you can actually cut into it, so it's not impermeable, but it's tough enough to be pretty permanent. Otherwise, we wouldn't still have some of these. But it shows a writing relationship between you and your surroundings. So one of the things that printing does, for example, is it lacks depth. It reduces both, say, the printing or the vinyl surface or whatever that you're printing on, and the writing as close to being two-dimensional as possible. And so consequently, there's no engaged relationship between the symbol and the substance. And when that happens, all of a sudden you get a form of writing that draws on both the substance and the symbol. And you kind of go, oh, so this writing in buffalo horn, it's not just that it's available and convenient, it's drawing on the buffalo for it to have value and meaning. And therefore, even when you take that particular symbol that was incised in the buffalo and you put it on, for example, a piece of paper, it still has that cultural memory. It's still part of the flora and fauna of that culture. I think of writing as being affected even by climate, because the climate of an area affects what will grow there. And so you get writing in Indonesia on palm leaves, in the Philippines you get it on bamboo, and that creates the shapes of the letters concerned. So when you see that, you realize that our understanding of writing misses that completely. And our sense that we wish everybody would, write the Latin alphabet or whatever, because wouldn't that be more convenient, is first of all, it would be more convenient for us and way less convenient for everybody else. But secondly, it really impoverishes that relationship that writing perpetuates or can perpetuate.
Absolutely. It neglects the fullness of the linguistic ecosystem, kind of like your...
Ooh, I like that. I think I have to use that in the next edition.
You are more than welcome.
Thanks so much.